Welcome to One Big Boat. We're all in this together. A show focused on nonprofit organizations whose work is making a true difference in people's lives. Today, we welcome Daniel Winslow, the president of the New England Legal Foundation.
Welcome to One Big Boat. We're all in this together. I'm the host and partner here at Last Minute Productions, Jay Dobeck, and my guest from the New England Legal Foundation is Daniel Winslow. You're the president? Is that correct?
I'm the president and the general counsel.
Oh, that's awesome.
I get to wear two hats.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So what's your elevator pitch? If somebody asks you, what is NELF? What is it?
So NELF was founded about 50 years ago by a group of corporate general counsels who were concerned that the voice of business, the interest of free enterprise, economic liberty, were not being considered by state and federal appellate judges as they made law that affected all of our businesses and our sectors. And so they just wanted to make sure there was balance. So essentially, we're judicial branch lobbyists. We file amicus or friend of the court briefs in state and federal court, sometimes the U.S. Supreme Court, to basically bring a voice to advocate for free enterprise, property rights, a limited government based on rule of law, and inclusive growth. Those are our four missions.
And so what, large, small individuals, who do you work with?
We work with a variety of folks. We have anywhere from Fortune 50 companies that are among our sponsors and some of the biggest law firms in New England and beyond, to mid-sized law firms and small firms, even solo practitioners among our sponsors, as well as small companies. Some companies pay us as little as $1,000 to sponsor us because they like our work, and some companies thankfully pay us a lot more.
How do they find you?
So largely through our advocacy, and we're trying to do a better job making noise, not for noise's sake, but simply to make sure that people understand that these foundational values that we stand for mean something, and these foundational values are worth standing up for.
Yeah. So give us some cases. One is being argued now in front of the Supreme Court.
Right. We were the first organization in the United States, actually, to urge merits review of the Loper-Bright case. That's the case that's going to be looking into whether or not we should change or modify what's known as the Chevron doctrine, where federal judges would give deference to the expertise of federal agencies. And, part of the concern is that there was so much deference given by federal judges that many of the judges seemingly were abdicating their role as judges to sort of be the guardians of where the boundaries are in the Constitution between executive and legislative branch power.
Yeah. So what initiatives do you have out there that you'll talk about?
Well, we're doing on three really exciting projects. The first is the Equalizer Institute. There's a gap in the legal ecosystem between civil legal aid for the poor and market rate law firms. And into that gap fall a lot of entrepreneurs who are unable to afford the cost of lawyers to help them navigate the bureaucracy and cut through all of the red tape. That's Black-owned business, women-owned business, new Americans, veterans, college students, returning citizens, people that have a business plan. They've got the drive. They are pursuing the American dream, but they run into a wall of bureaucracy, basically. And without the benefit of counsel, those walls are sometimes impossible to scale.
Yeah, and so we did a video for this great organization, and we got to go up to Dover, New Hampshire, where a woman, a husband military vet, or is in the military.
She's a military vet,
and
yeah.
She has a place in Dubuque, Montana,
yeah,
and has a place in Dover, New Hampshire, and wanted to move down here to Mass. And what happened to her? So
this is a restaurant, a female, Black-owned, veteran-owned restaurant, and the local permitting process in Boston just proved to be too much for her in terms of uncertainty and delay and cost. So she withdrew her proposal to have this new restaurant in the seaport in Boston, and she took her idea instead to the state of North Carolina, where within weeks her new business was up and running. And so that's part of the challenge. A lot of what we face, whether it's lack of job opportunity or the cost of housing, which I can talk about in a minute, or other impediments to success, are because of the lack of freedom and I think an over-reliance or an over-assertion of government regulation. Government has, I think, an appropriate role for sure, but we've gotten to a point now where the bureaucracy and the need of the bureaucracy to continually expand and to grow and to increase budget is starting to swallow individual opportunities. And And we've got to restore that balance.
How do you weigh overreach? So you have rideshare companies, and they weren't doing background checks, and the government asked them to do background checks. So is that overreach, or is it they do that and then they do a couple other things? Like, where's the line?
Well, we look to the constitutional structure of government. So, for example, in the Loper-Bright case, a federal agency wanted to put federal agents on fishing vessels to make sure that they were complying with the law, and Congress allowed that. You can have agents on fishing vessels. And then the agency went to Congress and said, we'd like an appropriation, we'd like funding to hire all these agents that we'd like to put on these vessels. And Congress said no. And so instead the agency went and they said, well, we're just going to charge the fishermen a fee, which, by the way, amounts to about 20% of the cost of doing business if they catch fish, and there was no authorization for that in the statute. In fact, the statute was silent. And what was frightening, and this was the Chevron doctrine deference that was shown by the circuit judge, they said, well, Congress didn't say you can't charge a fee. Well, it turns our constitutional government on its head. So that's an example of overreach, where an agency goes beyond its lane, goes outside what really was authorized by the people's elected and accountable representatives.
And so from the large company to the landowner to the homeowner, what is your initiative here? What's your drive?
So the Equalizer Institute is this. We're going to be, as we raise money, we will be creating free corporate legal clinics for underserved entrepreneurs to be able to start their new businesses. We will supplement our staff council with task-based, non-litigation pro bono, that's donated legal services from law firms, and then also train third-year law students in basic corporate law as our interns, so that when they graduate and hang out their shingle, we can refer these newly hatched businesses to their newly minted law practices, and synergistically they can grow together. That's the vision for the Equalizer Institute. We think it's about a 6x ROI. That is, for every $600,000 of cost to us to put this together, we can put about $3.6 million of market rate legal services onto the street to help entrepreneurs create jobs and growth and hope.
Yeah, and how has that been? How is the funding on that?
Well, we're about halfway to our goal. We've had incredible support from the Cummings Foundation, which is here in Massachusetts, as well as the Rappaport Foundation and M&T Bank, and a couple of other individuals who are backing us. We have a number of requests pending. And my hope is that banks, which have an obligation under the Community Reinvestment Act, or the CRA, may see this as an opportunity for the banks to give back and to help enhance and boost neighborhoods that have been historically underprivileged.
So I was talking to somebody within your office, and they were talking about how you also will go in when it's not the most popular time to go in. And this was regarding Robinhood and some legislation that was going against them. And Robinhood was not that popular, but it was also going to affect so many other companies. And those companies didn't want to join in because they didn't want to be seen swimming in the same pool. Maybe you can talk about that.
Well, first of all, we're thankful that Robinhood is one of our sponsors. So sometimes, these values of free enterprise may not be popular, but we like to take a principled stand. And so, democracy is messy. Sometimes capitalism is messy. Freedom can be messy. It's not all nice and buttoned up like it is in a totalitarian regime. But we'd rather have a little bit of messiness. We'll sort it through as Americans if we have our liberty. And so we like to stand for liberty and economic liberty and opportunity.
Yeah. But by doing that, you're helping not just Robinhood, you're helping many other companies.
We all win when we all have a fair shot.
Okay. Yeah. What about home ownership? You were talking about there's a rent issue, there's an inflation of owning a home.
Massachusetts is, as people know, is facing a lot of challenges with affordable rental housing and affordable housing generally, even ownership. But on rental housing, a lot of what causes rent to be high in Massachusetts is self-inflicted injury. That is, government regulation that limit density, limit how much you can put onto an acre, require more acres to put something onto it, and a process for approvals that can be anywhere from 6 months to a year or longer. So there's uncertainty, there's the time value of money from delay, as well as how much or little you can do because of all of these restrictions. And so we are actually going to be proposing a model zoning bylaw for consideration by 2/3 of the communities in Massachusetts. 2/3 of the communities in Massachusetts are towns that have either open town meeting, or just about 32 of them have what's called representative town meeting, which means that citizens as the legislative branch, citizen legislators who care about the issue of affordable rent and diversity of housing stock, can actually get involved and make a proposal just like an elected representative could at the state level. So we are issuing something called a free market affordable rent model zoning bylaw as an alternative to government mandated rent control. Now just think about the insanity of this. Rents are high in Massachusetts because of too much government regulation. And so the solution that's being largely talked about is, well, we need more regulation. We'll just start to regulate the prices now. Well, the free market approach is different. It says, we'll peel back some of those regulations. We'll peel back some of these impediments and the cost and the delay and the uncertainty, so you can do more and put more units, more rental units on the same amount of property, but you have to agree for 30 years to charge no more than a certain price, which is an attainable price for people at the lower end of the working spectrum.
Yeah, so what communities are you targeting?
So we're going to put this out to have basically a thought leadership exercise. We believe that the best public policy are ideas that are forged in the crucible of debate. So you have a thesis or an antithesis, and it has a synthesis. So that basically the solution, the final answer, is better than any single point of view. But we don't have that debate in Massachusetts. We have really a dominant one-party monopoly of ideas in Massachusetts. And so there isn't any conversation being had right now about affordable rental prices other than rent control. Our purpose is to put another idea on the table to show that a free market approach is actually a better approach and something that we can empower towns directly through their direct democracy of town meeting to do.
Coming up,
one area of diversity that's, I think, not fully appreciated is diversity of thought and the diversity of ideas. Because if you have diversity of ideas, that's how you get better ideas.
how NELF is providing affordable legal services to companies throughout New England.
You talk on your website, you like a thought out debate, but in the fourth estate, the media, many of us, when we watch television, we want we want that decision right now. There's shows like First Take and stuff like that. Is there a time for that in today's society to have that long debate?
Well, it's not so much long in the debate. It's just the diversity of debate, the diversity of ideas. Diversity is a value, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking about gender diversity or race or ethnicity. But I think one area of diversity that's, I think, not fully appreciated is diversity of thought and the diversity of ideas. Because if you have diversity of ideas, that's how you get better ideas. And right now, we only have one idea in Massachusetts, which is, well, let's have government controls on price. Well, we think we have a better idea, and we want to have that idea in the public domain for consideration by the 2/3 of Massachusetts communities that can actually consider it.
And how do you have a diversity of ideas within NELF?
Well, within NELF, we are not partisan. So we welcome everybody who shares our fundamental values, our foundational values of just freedom, economic freedom. We recognize that different people have different levels of comfort in how much freedom. For example, the FAA is probably a commendable federal agency. It's nice to have your plane stay in the air as opposed to having the plane crash. We all get to sort it out in the judicial tort system later on. So some things where there's no chance of the market correcting it would be, I think, salutary, and I don't think there'd be a lot of debate about that. But government overreach and bureaucracy and the administrative state has so intruded into so many aspects of our daily lives that people may not even be aware of it. They may not even be aware of the impacts of it. Another thing that we're working on that we're pretty excited about too, and it's our third initiative for this year, and that's our legal fellowship program. And this is really for lawyers. It's interesting, in the practice of law, people will step away from the practice of law to maybe raise a family, for example, or if a relative is sick, a parent might have Alzheimer's and they're the sole caregiver, or for whatever reason, for family reasons or other reasons, people step away from the practice of law. And what we've seen, and it's not all women, but it's largely women that are impacted by this, if people step away from the active practice of law and then, some years later, they want to go back to the practice of law, they now have a gap in their professional resume. We want to fill that gap by creating the New England Legal Foundation's Legal Fellows Program. And what that is this. Any lawyer who steps away from the active practice of law, but they want to keep their fingers in it, can apply to be a legal fellow at NELF. That's what we call ourselves, NELF. They can apply to be a legal fellow at NELF. And all they have to do to be a legal fellow at NELF, if we accept them, is we will put their name on our website and their bio. We'll give them legal malpractice insurance. We'll give them an office to work in Boston if they'd like to have an office to work in from time to time. All they have to give us is one amicus brief, that is one friend of the court brief per year. They have to organize one CLE or event per year. They have to put together one thought leadership op-ed or white paper per year, or they have to donate some time for the Equalizer Institute to help represent an entrepreneur who's just getting started. Just one of those four things. And, if life happens and they can't do it, we're flexible about it. We recognize family first. In return for that, they fill the gap. And if somebody is a legal fellow with us for 5 years, we will then promote them to become a senior legal fellow. What we found is that, and we didn't realize this, it's accidental, but a number of companies are actually interested in hiring lawyers for 2 or 3 hours at a time. And so we've actually had general counsel from companies approach us and say, look, if you get this Legal Fellows program started, we'll be happy to pay you, NELF, $350 an hour, and you pay them $250 an hour. They can actually make a couple of $1,000 per week as stay-at-home moms or dads or whatever they're doing, if they choose to. And I think that's an added benefit, not just for our legal fellows, but also for the companies that are sponsoring us to be able to have access to these great, great talents that are just stepping away from the usual track for the law.
When you think about government, it's obviously elected by the people, elected, and it's for the people. So why not just trust that system over yours?
A couple of things. You remember Ronald Reagan used to have that line. He'd say, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. It's not just the elected representatives. It's the administrative state that has sprung up, that sort of permanent administrative state. It's the same bureaucracy, no matter really who's in charge anymore. In Massachusetts, they're union protected, so they're not going anywhere. And by the way, I've worked with these people my entire career, some wonderful people. We're talking about the structure writ large, not the individual. Some of the individual most dedicated, conscientious people I've ever worked with are in the state agencies. But the nature of bureaucracy writ large is one where it never shrinks. It always wants to grow. In order to grow, it needs to justify why it needs to grow. And so it needs to expand its reach. And then there's where's the limit? Where's the limit? And so, for example, Michelle McPhee in the Boston Herald, when she used to write for the Herald, wrote a story about a fellow in East Boston who was a sandwich maker. And he came here from the old country and he worked his way up, saved his money, got a food truck. His sandwiches were so popular, people would line up down the block. And he's like, this is amazing. I can't keep enough inventory. So he saved his money, scrimped and saved, and he leased a sandwich shop of his own. This is the American dream. And the way it was reported in the Herald, it was beautiful. The guy was so excited. It had the stainless steel counters and the refrigerators and everything. And when he went to open up, according to the Herald story that Michelle wrote, the city would not allow him his certificate of occupancy because the font on his awning was not the right size. It didn't comply with the city ordinance for the size of signs. So this guy knows sandwiches. He doesn't know sign law. So he applied to the city to have that waived. Yeah. And he waited and he waited. 6 months he waited, carrying that closed store. And he couldn't do it. And he finally shut down and went back to his food truck. And the shame of it is that the people in the sign department, or whatever the department is that oversees sign fonts in the city of Boston, they're getting paid 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, whether or not they dealt with that guy's sign request or not. So one of the things that the free market affordable rent model bylaw has as a provision is we propose to flip the script for local approval. We recognize the bureaucracy is what it is. You're not going to peel it back without wholesale political change in Massachusetts, But we like the idea of flipping the script by saying, hey, bureaucrats don't like to own the yes, but they also don't like to own the no. So instead of having this interminable review process and appeal process and application process and public hearings ad infinitum, where it can take 6, 9, 12, a year and a half months to get something done, why do we do this? Simple change, 2 things. No public hearing can be continued without the consent of the applicant. Now, there's a lot of times there's loose ends in a proposal, and it's in the applicant's interest to give reasonable consent to some period of time to close up those loose ends. But when you have the Board of Health in one direction and the Concom in the other direction, and the planning board doing it, and the local boards can't even agree with each other, and you're caught in the middle and they want more time, well, that's a good reason to shut down the hearing. The second part of the proposal is this. Any proposal, any application that is not denied within 60 days after the close of a public hearing is deemed approved. So it's 60 days. Either you're going to be denied or it's going to be deemed approved. Now, I shared that idea with a local planner, and she was aghast. She said, that's going to really increase our litigation budget. So, well, maybe you shouldn't deny things that you don't have a good basis to deny. Maybe we should only deny the things that really, truly cause public harm, because people are investing in your community. They're creating jobs. We should celebrate these people. We shouldn't treat them like animals or worse. So, we just have to have a reset, I think. And why should we trust free markets over governments? Well, free markets really derives to the individual. Not to say that unfettered free markets, there's always appropriate levels of regulation, of course, but people have a shot, because what happens is if you don't have a fair shot, then opportunity only becomes available to those that are very rich or very well-funded or very powerful or very connected, and not everybody else. And that's just wrong.
Is it just Massachusetts you're dealing with?
Well, our focus is New England. And so Massachusetts is the dominant economy in New England. And so Massachusetts is a good place to start.
Yeah. Well, do you deal with Rhode Island issues? Do you go up to Maine?
We do.
New Hampshire is very different than Massachusetts.
We do. Yeah. We don't have a lot of litigation actually in New Hampshire precisely for that reason. There's just not a lot of pushback in New Hampshire. But we have, for example, in New Hampshire, there were some folks that wanted PFAS, very serious environmental issue, the so-called perpetual chemicals that are in the groundwater. So some folks in New Hampshire wanted the state's Supreme Court to make a ruling on PFAS. Well, the legislature, which is accountable to and elected by the people, hadn't had a chance to weigh in on the state's policy about PFAS. And so we jumped into that case and said, look, at judiciary, this is not your call. It's not a matter of constitutional law. You have to let the people's elected representatives make this decision, not you, the unelected branch of government. And so that's an example of something we did in New Hampshire. That was talking about the principle of constitutional governance.
How do you guys, are you guys finding, I mean, do you sit there and read the legal papers every day, the business page every day and say, oh, that's something we can do?
Well, no, it's not. Usually cases find us, but there's a couple of things we're working on now. One is squatters' rights. There's a growing movement in the western part of the United States right now, and it's coming our way, of squatters, people that, go into your second home, or they'll rent an Airbnb and they just won't leave. And then they assert tenants' rights, which can take 2-3 years to evict a tenant in Massachusetts or other states. And so we're starting to look at squatters' rights. We're also looking at just sort of quality of life issues. For example, Boston does a really good job highly regulating everybody who tries to engage in legitimate commercial trade. Are panhandlers engaged in a commercial trade? Because they're not regulated. As other states, North Carolina, for example, have actually regulated. They treat panhandling as a commercial activity where you actually have to register. You have a badge. You have a code of conduct. You can't harass people. You can't commit assault. You can't commit criminal conduct to shake people down, cause people to fear for their safety. And they don't even charge a fee. It's just, you just want to know who people are. They're approaching people in the street. Some areas under the Constitution can limit speech in terms of time, place, not content, but time or place, location. Maybe that's something that we ought to consider about panhandling as well. It's gotten so out of control in cities like San Francisco that it's actually hurting the city's economy. It's hurting the quality of life in San Francisco. And, again, just like the squatters, they're coming east.
Yeah. I went through your website. It's huge. You do a lot. Is there something that we've missed that people need to know about?
I think that for law firms and for lawyers, general counsel, beyond our main mission, I think there's real value to connection. And we are one of the few organizations where corporate general counsels and law firm managing partners are both active members of our organization. And we think that there's real value in just getting people in the room together. We actually have parties. We call them cocktails and jazz. We just get people together. It's an excuse to get in the room, meet new people, make connections. We also have something called the New England GC Roundtable, which is limited just to GCs and CLOs, chief legal officers, so that they get to meet their colleagues, from their sector or from their sized company or from their area. And just there's some real value in connection, and we want to promote that.
Yeah. How can people find you?
You can find us on the web. We're at newenglandlegal.org. That's newenglandlegal.org. And if you'd like to know more information about the Equalizer Institute, that's equalizerinstitute.org.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on, Jay.
And we'll see you on another episode of One Big Boat. Thanks so much.
One Big Boat is a production of Last Minute Productions, Incorporated. This episode was produced by Jay Dobeck. Executive producer, Jay Dobeck. Scott Wyman was the sound engineer. Jim Johnston and Gary Gillis provided production support and editing. And Joanne Pilata was the production coordinator.